Direct from historic downtown Orange, California, it's time for the Bob Gurr Show. From undersea adventures to highways in the sky, he's done it all. And now, here's your host, the man, the myth, the Disney legend, Bob Gurr.
Hey kids, I have a lot of interesting guests here on my show, but today I have the most super guy I think I've ever met. He just works like mad all his life. David Kirschner. If you know the Chucky series and you like Hocus Pocus and especially American Tail, my friend here, David Kirschner.
Such a pleasure to be here.
Okay, well anyway, there's an interesting thing about David. Did you know that he and Disneyland has just about the same birthday? Yes, 6 weeks before Disneyland opened, he was already here. He beat Disneyland by 6 weeks. So the interesting thing is, as I look at his life and everything he's done, he and Disneyland grew up together. So as we talk about things, you'll see the time frames. And a lot of you guests have been at Disneyland all that time. Okay. So one of the things that I find out in talking to people is a person who has a really, really solid career path. There's always something that starts that career and they never notice how it got started, and that's what I'm going to ask you. What I find out is that everybody grows up, and then there's always a little snippet of some image that might have been fun or terrifying, almost anything, but it does not connect with anything as you look back and wonder, what was that? Oh, I hope I'd see that again. Oh, I don't want to get near that again. And it always happened between 3 years and 5 years old, right in that little narrow time frame. And everybody says, oh, I can't remember any of that. And then as soon as you start to think about it, yeah, there's 1 or 2 or 3 little things that you still have in your mind. And those, I call those are like the seeds of your nature. And then as you grow along in life, you get 3, 4, 5 years old, you realize, oh, you have parents, you have friends, there's environment all around you. And these little seeds get modified. And that's called the nurture. In other words, your nature gets nurtured. And it all starts in that little period. So let's see if you can remember 1 or 2 little things that have always bugged you because it never connected to something.
That it never connected to something. I mean, that's a tough one for me because as a kid, I don't think that I, or my parents understood that I had a wild imagination. I think that I love watching scary movies, and by night the entire family would pay the price. I'd want every light in the house on. We didn't have air conditioning, couldn't afford it, and I'd have like 12 blankets on me so that whoever was going to stab me wouldn't be able to get the knife all the way through. I mean, that's what I was thinking as a kid.
Oh my God.
And I loved Halloween and all of these things. And I love what you said about the nurture one's nature, because I was unaware of these things that were the vitamins for me to grow as
That's
as a
what I'm
thinker.
looking for. You can call them vitamins. It sounds like there must have been enough of them that there's no singular things that stand out. There was enough that was blended enough that you immediately wanted to create all these images in your mind.
You know, I always say I look at life like an impressionistic painting. Impressionistic paintings are made up of pieces of color. And if you look closely, you just see swatches of color. But if you stand back, you see a painting. And in the case of life, you see a life. And for me, the idea of things that went bump in the night, things that had imagination. So when I was 7 or 8, my parents took me for my birthday to the Cinerama Dome to see how the West was won. And as this little boy sitting in this seat, staring up at this enormous screen, it just came over me. I wanted to be a part of this. And I didn't even understand what this was, but this magic that was before me. I saw all these names and credits and directors and producers and writers. I didn't know what any of that meant. It called to me. And it's not like I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid. It's not like I wanted to be a policeman. This is what I wanted to do. And, by the time I was 10 years old, I was making animated movies with my dad's Kodak movie camera, and moving soldiers around in stop motion, and creating forced perspectives, because Darby O'Gill and the Little People had just so blown me away. And I had read all about this, of forced perspectives, and this little boy trying to understand exactly what that meant. And all of these pieces, I think, are the colors in that impressionist painting that was and is my life. I really haven't changed since I've been 7 or 8. Yes, I've matured to some degree, but I've still held on to the childhood of things that scare me, things that go bump in the night. I'm just so taken by this. And honestly, Bob, your work, and I said this to you when we met before, on my closet door, there was a picture of you in the Utopia, I guess your first designs, on a field. I don't know if that's where Disneyland would become.
That's right.
But that was on my closet door.
Oh my God.
Because guys like you were my heroes. They weren't the sports guys. I didn't really care about that. I still don't. It's the people who bring just happiness into others' lives by their creations and the memories of those creations.
Okay. Well, this is a curious thing. You've indicated that it was like an instantaneous thing. You're looking at a movie screen, and all of a sudden you were just totally enraptured by this idea. I can understand that, because people would say, Bob, how come you are interested in some things? And I says, well, it was cars and airplanes at around 3 years old. And it's still cars and airplanes at 92. This is a fixed image thing. And it came about where I see a world around me, and I saw airplanes, because we lived near an airport. Airplanes would go over, and the street was full of cars. So cars and airplanes grabbed me. Nothing else grabbed me. It's just what you said. So I understand how that would do. Some kids take a long time to figure their way through something that's a collection of little stuff, but nothing big and dramatic like you got.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to hop ahead just a little bit. The proof of that is you have a good friend, Steven Spielberg, and he played with his mother's camera, and he invented little scenes and things. So you two guys are like peas in the same pod, that you got grabbed by something to do with imagery, and then it just, oh, I could create imagery. Oh, it's the same way I see cars, but I could create the cars that don't exist with my pencil. Oh, this is like a piece of power, I think. You and I understand and do that. But here was a cute little bit of when you first met Steven Spielberg. I understand you went over to his house, and he had this idea for this cute little story, which has turned out to be American Tail. And you had the story, and he was looking at the story, and he did a very cute thing. He says, it's here, and he pointed at your head, and he says, it's also in there. And I was so struck by that, because Walt Disney had that same characteristic. He could look at somebody and know in a wink what they might be able to do, and they'd never done it, and all of a sudden they find they can do it. It's kind of a sixth sense. And I think I worked with Spielberg for about 5 months one day, and I watched how he would think. He was perceptive. He somehow, by the time you're in your 20s, he nailed you so solidly, and you took off like a shot. You've never stopped ever since.
It really helped to have the Spielberg pixie dust on me.
Yeah.
Because, you know, especially in the late 80s, people wanted to work with Spielberg as they do today, of course. And the fact that he had said yes to a project of mine all of a sudden made me appear to have more talent because of that magic Spielberg pixie
And that was
dust.
right in the middle of the 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought, what a significant change point, because I felt the same thing when I asked to go to the Disney studio and then see what I'm going to ask to do. And it was like, oh, this is a massive amount of excitement. And that's the way it went, just like that.
I often say, I mean, we get paid to do a lot of the things, I'll speak for myself, that I got in trouble for as a kid, and that is drawing creatures and staring out a window when I should have been concentrating on math in school. And today I get paid to do that, and to me it's the greatest gift in the world. I could be digging ditches, and I get to do what I love, that I've done since I was a little boy.
Well, here's another curious thing I know about you. Generally speaking, if somebody has a line of work they do and they're steady at it, they usually don't do a lot of peripheral things. Like, let's say in my industry, you have a person who draws the pretty pictures and then we're going to build something for Disneyland. Then there's somebody else who will make all the manufacturing drawings, and somebody else will make all the stuff and install it. That's like compartmentalize things, but you never compartmentalized yourself. It must have been very logical to say, oh, I have this idea. Oh, I can see how to flesh it out. Oh, it's still an idea. It's paper, it's story. But then to hop over the fence and say, oh, the logistics of production, the logistics of staging, money, budget, time, people, all this kind of stuff. This puzzles me. How in the world you were able to jump from a story guy into, well, it's just as much fun to produce them anyway. How did you do that?
You know, I was always surrounded by really smart people, so I must say that and give credit to those people. I'm really still not a math guy, but I am a people person. And I remember reading Walt Disney saying, a little girl said, if you don't draw the pictures and if you don't write, what is it that you do? And Walt said, well, I'm like a bee that goes around from flower to flower to make sure each of those flowers really flourishes. And I read that when I was young, and it really struck me. I remember Kathy Kennedy, who was Steven's producing partner and now runs Lucasfilm, saying to me, David, you need to decide, because it's confusing to people. You draw, and then you write, and you want to be a producer. You need to choose one. And I have so much respect for this woman. She's like one of the greatest producers ever. But that's just who I am, and that's my toolbox that I use to take the things out of here and make them happen. And, you know, so far it's been okay for me.
Well, that's interesting because, one of the first meetings with Spielberg, we were all in that little room out in the ranch out next to the river, and Kathleen was here and Stephen was there. But to learn from you now that she was trying to compartmentalize you, this is an interesting thing, because I started to mention that an industry gets in such a way that everybody's in a box with a description.
It's so true.
And then sometimes people don't understand. There are people who jump back and forth between all the boxes, and they're 100% comfortable. Every time somebody says, Bob, how did you do something? And they say, well, you did this, 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 and this. And I said, well, it's natural. I can sketch a monorail. I can make an illustration. I can do the production drawings. I can be in the shop helping building it. And I'm the test driver. What's your question? And you did exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
I got another question to do. Let's go back to American Tail, because this was after you wrote the cute little book. You did this story, and when I look at the story description, as it's published today, and thinking that is a inviting, goofy little thing. A Jewish mouse wants to go to America, and hopping ahead to the film being finished, some years later, I'd like to ask you a question about, let's say, it's not so much authorship, but it's like the original person who has the original picture or the original sketch or the original something, and then to get it to actually happen goes through all these other departments, everybody involving everything. And the movie industry is like, production notes. And in your case, it was like we have to critique it every day, dailies. How do you develop the patience to know that your baby has been handed off to all these people who are going to manipulate the daylights out of the thing until it finally gets all the way done? The tale of building that tale story had the most incredible bunch of disruptions and interruptions over a period of years. And when I read about that, I thought, you have to have the patience that they're not going to kill your baby while they're trying to make it grow into a movie. How did you deal with that?
Well, I think one of the answers is the fact of the name again, Spielberg. Just the idea that my first film was being produced, Steven Spielberg Presents, was so huge to me. And I think I was so living in the moment of this world. And Don Bluth, the legendary animation director Don Bluth, who started at Disney, to be lucky enough to be there and to watch this happening. I honestly didn't feel any frustration with that. That would come in time later on. But I felt so fortunate that Steven had bought it, that Don Bluth was signed to direct it. James Horner would do the music, who would go on to win an Academy Award for Titanic and a million other things. I just felt like, pinch me. I'm going to wake up and be on a Little League field at 9 years old at my worst nightmare. So just the idea that I was living this was so exciting to me. And I often, as I'm going to sleep at night, and I do this, I kind of step through the museum of my imagination, of moments that I've been so lucky with. And that's a key one for me, living through that period. There were times that it was rough too. Don Bluth, I'll be very honest, was at that time not particularly welcoming to me. I'm not an animator, I'm an illustrator. And he had wanted to do a film with Steven for a while. And whatever he brought to Steven, it just wasn't right for Steven.
Well, here's an interesting point. In my mind, I'm seeing you're 7 and 8, and you go to the CinemaScope, and you suddenly see this thing you want to be a part of. From 7 and 8 up to the 20s, think of that. What was going through your mind that this is what you wanted to do, and all of a sudden you find yourself, I've created a story. Spielberg likes it. It's going to involve animation. It's going to involve a whole bunch of stuff. That must have been a gratifying moment that said, oh, here's the big spark. Ooh, now here's the big production. That might have been the fact that it'd be your first big movie. You'd probably never watched all the steps to make a movie, so I could see that maybe there wasn't anything to be upset about, because every day is a new added thing, and the steps and the procedures going all the way through the movie. But you got to watch the whole thing from that first idea in your head all the way to boom, the premiere, and there it is. That must have been something to watch your baby mature and become a real thing. And everybody liked it.
It was an e-ticket, if you will.
Yeah.
An e-ticket to filmmaking, to be able to sit there with Steven Spielberg and Kathy Kennedy and Don Bluth and then James Horner. It was so exciting for me. And but I will say that there was a period that it was tough. Don Bluth did not appreciate the fact that I wasn't an animator, and Steven wanted to stay with my designs of the characters. And by the way, and Don created a lot of great characters in the film that I didn't. But the family, the Mouskowitz family, were my characters, my designs, and you know, there was a screening that we had at the Academy, Motion Picture Academy, and Stephen and Kathy were not there, and Don got up and spoke and thanked everybody down to the ink and painters. My family's sitting with me and doesn't even mention me. And I honestly, I had tears running down my face, and I was embarrassed, you know, because my credits on the film are a story created by and executive produced with Steven Spielberg, and yet this guy doesn't even acknowledge me. And I got home kind of licking my wounds, and about 15 minutes after we were home, the phone rang, and it was Kathy. And she said, "I heard what happened tonight." She said, "I'm really sorry. Expect a call from Don." And I said, "Oh, no, don't say anything. That's fine. No. I don't want to make an issue of this." But someone had said something to her. And 10 minutes later, Don Bluth called me and said, "I'm so sorry. I just got off a plane, and I was jet lagged." I'm not sure I believe that, because he had been pretty rough with me during production, which, you know, I was just a quiet kid. At one point, Kathy said to me, "You need to speak up, because if you don't, there's no reason for you to be in these meetings." And, you know, it was a good kind of kick in the keister to say, you know, believe in yourself, and you created this. Don't just sit there and let everybody else talk about it. And I learned a lot from that, and from Kathy.
Well, the same situation I saw in the film business at Disney. There were stories that happen all the time where, you know, at the premiere, everybody sits in the crew and they watch to the last name and the last credit. It rolls all the way down. The regular audience never sees that, but that big, long list of everybody in there. And there were several occasions where somebody who just worked on the movie, for a Disney movie, and would confront Walt with, you never recognized me on the credits." And Walt had a quick answer. "My name is on the door, and don't ever forget it," which is a serious chop, but you understand it in an instant. And then once you've had that chop, you're used to that afterwards. It's like, well, that's the way some of these things go. But I kind of get the feeling that a few more movies down the line, you understood more about how these things go, and if you got a chop or an omission or something in your mind, which I've had to say to me, well, a lot of people know who really did it, regardless of what somebody said, which is the kind of a thing which means you immune yourself from being slighted. But if you don't do that, you wind up hurting yourself all the time, because you expect something that's not going to come. Right. Yeah. Do you get used to that after a while?
Yes and no. You know, I think as the albatross that hangs around our neck, as sensitive people, we see the world maybe differently than a lot of other people, and we're able to take the things that so many other people identify with and bring it into their home or onto their desk as a design or creature that people love collecting, like Funko Pops or whatever. And so that part is so wonderful. But the albatross is that I'm still a sensitive person, and someone that's very loyal. And so, you know, when it doesn't happen as much as, you know, at the beginning of your career, certainly, but it's something that I try to be so cognizant to give everybody credit that contributed. It's always important to me to say, you know, it's not just me. It's the very smart math people, the someone taking some of my designs and making them so much better, or making my stories so much better.
People who are creative generally are very emotional about it, because they have an authorship of their idea which came out of their thoughts. And sometimes people will ask me, well, how did you get from this all the way to the thing running in the park? And I says, it's quite simple. It rattles around in here. It runs down my arm. It runs out my pencil. And the first pencil hits there is the first that my private idea becomes visible. And then the visibility spreads. But I know for certain, the more it spreads through all the stuff that to produce something big, it's going to be sort of diluted a little bit, and I have this fear that was my idea. Don't screw that up, because if it's screwed up even slightly, I forever look back and says, oh, that was not very good. But I have to just go, it's okay. It was still my initial idea. That's what.
Is there something in Disneyland that you created, and from what you created on paper and the thing it became, that you were disappointed in?
Yeah, not as much as some other people. I think I was very, very lucky in that maybe a little bit like how Spielberg could say a few words and you'd get very, very inspired over doing something. Somehow, when Walt would give me a job, almost always, he would say something like, Bobby, I want you to get started on this right away. And he didn't give me anything specific. And he'd walk away. Stop and think of that. Every big machine I ever did was the same way. Nothing very specific. That meant I have the white piece of paper and I have the pencil. I have 100% pure start. 100% of it is here. And it spreads out and it gets very, very far before anybody starts to say anything. And generally speaking, what Walt would do, he did this to everybody else. He'd walk around and see what you're doing once in a while. And if it was good, he just kept walking. Didn't say a word. No attaboys. But if something was not to his liking, as it's progressive and changing, he would start the conversation. Say, Bob, did you ever think? And then he says something, and then all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. What he just did was somebody else would critique you and say, well, that's not what I want you to do. But Walt would invite you to continue coming up with your ideas and feed it by improving it as you went along. What a gigantic difference in how a leader would treat people. Never criticize a creative person. You know, you can hurt them every time you do that. Well, what if you say, in effect, boy, all your ideas are good, but you could throw in a couple more good ideas into that, you know, which is a reverse way of a crit.
Right.
Yeah, there's only a few managers ever do that. I'd have to put Spielberg and Disney and Steve Wynn in Las Vegas in the same category. They had this proverse way of saying something very adverse and doing it without hurting a creative person. I watched that all the time. I was very impressed. So as you went along, tell me a little bit how you kind of shifted gears from, let's say, the crazy idea of the Mouskowitz family, and then later on, you spent a lot of time as executive producer and producer. And it's like you could jump back that fence all the time, regardless of what Kathleen Kennedy said. You know, you ought to pick one or the other.
Right.
How did that evolve over the time? I'm kind of sensing that you kind of got used to it, and the more you did it, the more you liked it.
That's very true. The more I did it, the more I liked it. I really wanted to prove after An American Tail that I could do something scary as well, because Hitchcock was also a huge influence on me. And I had read a script called Blood Buddy about a doll that came to life, and I had been in London with my wife Liz, and I bought a book on Victorian dollhouse murders. And that just always fascinated me. There was a Twilight Zone when I was a kid with Telly Savalas called Talking Tina, about a doll that spoke and then winds up killing this evil stepfather. And I loved it. My point was with what children imagine by day and by night. And Walt Disney understood this, the beauty and the sweetness of a thumper, and then the scene of mother dying with just a gunshot. And that Disney feeling was continued in The Lion King with the death of Simba's father. And you know, Grimm's understood this very well fairy tales are all about, the beauty and then the darkness. And Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Treasure Island and was the toast of the British Isles. He then turned around and wrote The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the London Times said he should be banned from Victorian society, and then turned around and wrote A Children's Garden of Verses. And so I think it's always a mistake for people to try to put us in a box again of thinking of we should only be doing this or that. Creative minds are fertile, and we think in all different ways. I'm still, and I make my wife crazy with this, I need the alarm on every night. Liz sleeps with one foot sticking out of the covers, which I find to be one of the most irresponsible things a human being could do, because when those lights go out, there are creatures underneath our bed. And that hasn't changed since I've been 7. And I'm not embarrassed to say it, but it is the truth. I still have those fears. And nothing upsets Liz or concerns her with those, but I'm positive when those lights go out, things begin to climb out from under the bed and the closet. And I'm so happy that I've been able to hold on to those precious gifts of childhood, of my boyhood.
Well, let me share a little bit of my boyhood of 7 and 8. We had radio, no television. Didn't have enough money in World War II to go see movies all the times. But the little radio that my mother gave me, I'm supposed to go to bed, but I found the radio, you could turn the volume down to where you could just barely hear the hum, so she couldn't hear the hum, and then come back just to hear, and I could listen to the radio. As I recall, it was like programs are 15 minutes long. There'd be 4 of them in an hour. The Green Hornet, Lights Out, Arch Obler, all of these things. I had years of laying in my bed, not asleep, listening to these programs, one after another. And it didn't dawn on me till later. I thought, aren't those movies? Because I made the movie in my head, listening only to the words and the sounds that come out of a little itty-bitty radio. And kids grow up today, they have no idea how you could scare yourself to death by your own imagination of words coming out of a little radio. That was such a strong era. I'm sorry you missed that one, but I see you're creating it for yourself anyway.
But I'll tell you, I didn't miss it, because when I was 16, 17, I worked at Tower Records on Sunset Boulevard, famous record store, and where most other people that worked there were buying British imports of punk music and whatever. I was buying everything, Disney soundtracks and radio shows. So I had the Green Hornet, I had the Shadow, the Lone Ranger. I had all of these that I would listen to. I will go into my office, I will turn off the lights, and I will turn on pieces of classical music and just sit there. Sometimes I'll light a candle, and the flicker of the flame and just what it does to the walls and all of my stuff on the walls. It just gets me going. But there's a particular piece of music by a composer by the name of Penderecki, and it's called The Entombment of Christ, and it's Gregorian chants sung by monks, and it is so haunting. Your imagination just explodes with imagery and what you're seeing, and I find that such a wonderful exercise to take me to places that I might not normally go.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because I've never had a specific kind of music I would like, but over time I would hear a Gregorian chant and wonder, oh, it's a bunch of dark stonework. There's big scale things.
That's great.
And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then in the last couple of decades, when somebody says, well, what music do you like? I go, oh, ambient electronica. My God, Bob, you're in your 80s. Electronic. Yeah, because I'll have a quiet period I'm listening to something that doesn't have any structure. Do you know how free that is to be able to see music that's not like music in a way, because it lets you think? And then some years ago, I said, I'd like to do that. I started creating, I don't know anything about music. I started using GarageBand, and I created my own music.
Oh my God.
Yeah. One of them was called Mind Drift 3, where you could, your mind could just go, just like, and the music would let you do that.
It is. It's a launching pad for imagination.
Yeah.
You know, if you let it, if you take the time, and if you just kind of go into that place, and I hate to use the word Zen, but just into that Zen moment, and you're launched into all different worlds. And it's almost like a kaleidoscope for me, because specifically when I listen to Penderecki's The Entombment of Christ, every time I hear it, I see different things, and that's so exciting to me, just to be able to do that, and anybody can do it. It doesn't cost anything. You just go into a dark room and turn on your phone, you know, type it in and turn on your phone, and you're there hearing it, whether it's Dixieland, whether it's Mahalia Jackson with gospel, or the likes of Penderecki. It just takes you to these wonderful places. The Sherman Brothers did that with Disney. So, you know, they just helped you in the images that you were seeing, in just the amazing music that they created. Why are they listed as Imagineers, by the way?
I'm not sure. The Imagineering name just sort of showed up, you know, over the middle years. And it would kind of explain things, but I think in general, Richard and Robert contributed music a lot to the theme parks compared to other venues they would have been. And I think maybe Walt just sort of saw them as, well, we can't complete a ride unless Richard and Robert write something for it. So it's like, oh, well, then they're the music Imagineer. Something like that as a guess.
That's a great answer. Okay.
How that might have evolved. There's another area that might be kind of interesting to talk about. I get the impression that a lot of highly creative people can be so creative they forget the time of day, they forget to eat. If they're working on something that they're supposed to be doing with their hands, like in the kitchen making a cup of coffee or something, they make mistakes. And it happens to me continuously. My mind is always coming up with something. And some people call it daydreaming. I've had it all my life. I can't exactly concentrate on what I'm doing exactly, because some of the things are too routine. They're too automated. And then, making a cup of coffee, put the beans in, grinding it, doing all that, and then, I make a boo-boo of this and a boo-boo of that. Mr. Gurr, why can't you concentrate on there's nothing to making a cup of coffee. Yeah, but I'm thinking of all this stuff. Do you ever get into a period with that?
I mean, you have just peeled such a layer back on me, as my wife will tell you. I lose everything. I mean, and Liz has never lost anything in her life. And I've lost wallets in taxis. I've left artwork on the top of my car and driven off. I once had Tim Burton's artwork, so much of his original art. We were working together on, I'd done some drawings for him on Zero for Nightmare Before Christmas. And I had his original art in my car, and I forgot to lock my car. I come back, all of Tim Burton's original artwork is gone. I sat there and cried, because I just thought, I am going to be put before a brick wall and shot. He was so sweet about it and said, I have Xeroxes of everything, don't worry about it. Okay. He was so sweet about it, but I do this constantly. I've actually joked that we had 3 other children aside from our 2, that somewhere along the line I left somewhere. That's not true. But,
yeah, the idea, yeah.
But I lose everything, and I'm always using that excuse to Liz, which is, well, I'm a creative person, so my head is here. I'm not sure she's buying that.
Yeah.
Because someone that never loses anything. So.
No, the reason I ask that is because I've talked to other people sort of in the same boat in a way, and it seemed like I see it as a kind of a defect in a way, and I don't know what to do with it, except I get the impression over time, and now reinforce a little bit more with you, well, that's the penalty we pay if our synapses can come up with original things, we can't stop fleshing it out so that it becomes more and more visible. And if it worked well enough, yes, runs out on the pen, it goes down on the paper, and then pretty soon it's a product or an attraction or a ride.
Well, we don't make people happy for the things that we don't lose or we forget to do.
Yeah.
We make people happy, as what you said so brilliantly, what's up here goes down the arm and comes out on a pen, whether a drawing or a story.
Yeah.
And so I say, because I do forget everything, that with this little defect that we have, forget about it.
Okay.
Forget about it.
Well, you keep going back to entertaining people. This seems to be a silent satisfaction. As you know, I'll be hanging around Disneyland and people will walk up and they says, oh, they want to thank me for something that I designed. And it's kind of stalling in a way that some people are so emotional how they want to thank you for something. And when something happens quite often, a fella's got a little bit of gray hair on the side and his children are obviously old enough to have their own little kids. And a guy gets almost in tears saying, oh, Bob, I've been looking for you forever. They let me ride in the nose of the monorail when I was 5 and I never got over it. And then to stop and think, somebody has carried a thought of joy of a day and they have it in their head forever. And it's kind of unnerving to accept that, without kind of losing it in a way. You probably still have the thing. You have people come up to you and they'll talk about Chucky. Chucky looks inviting until you know a little bit more. The yin and the yang of sweetness, but ooh, it's bad. Yeah. And the fact that you can, in your mind, create the black and the white and the light and the dark and the yin and the yang in a character or a story that it looks safe, it looks okay, but don't get in the dark with it, because then their imagination is going to go finish the rest of the story and make it blacker than what you did, because you go right up to the edge of a little bit of bloodletting and you stop. You have a nice way of stopping and let person's imagination, ooh, what if Chucky really got loose in my house? Oh, just the thought of that. Mm-hmm. You must have fun doing that kind of thinking.
I do, and I want to go back to your thought at the beginning of what you were just saying, and that is how what we do, how it moves people, and they may be a bit gray, but there's something in their childhood, in their teens, in their 20s, whatever it was, that really stuck with them. And when they get to meet us, and they share these stories, I mean, when we spoke at WonderCon, there was a woman that came up and she started crying because she said she saw American Tail when she was 15, and she still has her stuffed Fievel, and she was crying as she was telling me what that meant to her and how important it was. And I'm always, maybe being the insecure artist, I'm always just shocked when someone says something like that. But it moves me and it makes me feel, I mean, I didn't get into this for moments like that. I got into this because this is probably the only thing that I really can do, and I love doing it.
Okay. Well, I have learned so much from you about you and about how you work in this industry, and especially the connection that you have with the viewers that come up to you after many, many years. Now, at that WonderCon a few weeks ago, you remember a lot of us were signing for a big group of people that wanted to have us sign everything, and I was upstream of you. And usually I just sign and the person just moves on down, but the people or the line was in front of me all this whole time. And I was watching how kind you are and how absolutely genuine with people of every size and shape and age. And some of the little girls, you'd pick them up and put them on the table, so the parents could get a much better photograph. I seldom ever see anybody who's a creator, who's got a very high degree of fame, be so genuine with his audience. This was one of the nicest 3 hours I think I've ever witnessed anywhere, is to watch how you so thoroughly can create a story and continue that story, closing the link with somebody who watched one of your movies or read one of your stories. That one of the nicest things.
That's so beautiful that you picked up on something that I can't say I'm even aware of that. I'd like to just think that's who I am. I work very hard to be a kind and good person. I feel so blessed to have everything in my life, from my wife and children and grandchildren to this job that I love. I can't even call it a job, my hobby that I love so much, that I'm so thankful that anybody even comes up and cares about this stuff. And it's something that moves me greatly. It's something that I just love this. I just love doing what I do. As I said, as a kid, the likes of Walt Disney, Alfred Hitchcock, my picture of you on my little closet door. These were the guys, these were my sports heroes, but these were my imaginary heroes. I mean, heroes that created elements from nothing. And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a part of that. And so to sit here for me today, I mean, of any interview that I've ever done in my entire life, and to God, this has been the most exciting. And I was a little nervous even coming in here, sitting with you, but just sitting in this environment just makes me feel like I'm at home. This is what my office looks like, except it doesn't say Bob Gurr, but with my posters and creatures and such. And it just makes me feel like, I want to have a play date with you tomorrow and build a treehouse.
Well, tell you what, I'll trade you Autopia for American Tail, because I still see a little Fievel. He's just like, where did he come from? It came right out of here, and it ran right off and became a movie. So, last question. I know you're busy all the time. What are you excited about? What's coming next for you?
I've written a story about Black music in America, a fantasy. It's really the first Black musical fantasy since The Wiz in the 70s. And I've also written a piece called Tulahate on India, and a very romantic tale and the birth of an elephant, and how this will change a very tough time in India. It was written, it takes place in the 1860s. So those are the two next projects. We're doing Hocus Pocus 3, which I'm very excited about. And Chucky will continue, of course. And we're doing a live action Curious George that Ron Howard will be directing.
Okay. It was very interesting that Hocus Pocus #1, and then the decades went by, and then all of a sudden people said, what happened to those? I'd like to see that again.
It took almost 9 years for it to get made, and then the worst reviews, barely performed at the box office, and I thought that was it. My career is over. But about 7 or 8 years later, it started to grow. Disney threw it up on the Disney Channel, and it got some decent numbers at Halloween. So they thought, oh, we'll do it again. And the numbers just kept building. And it took me 10 years to convince Disney to do Hocus Pocus 2, but they finally moved ahead with it, and now they're gung-ho on 3.
Well, this has been an amazing hour. I thank you, David, so much for being my guest down here in my cute little 1955 living room here. And you have just learned so much about a fella I've wondered about so much. So anyway, enjoy watching this whenever you get a chance. Thank you again, David, so much.
Thank you so much,
All
Bob.
right.
What a pleasure for me.